Before we officially kick it off here, talking about this film, Miss Fuhrman, I have to share something really quickly. In summer of 2009, I was going through a rough time, and I was going to the movies by myself because they were always there for me. And I went to see The Orphan, and it was at that very showing that I met my wife. So I guess I owe you a major thank you, because if I hadn't gone to that movie, or if you hadn't made it, I don't know where my life would be right now.
Whoa.
Can I just say how incredibly happy I am, because I love love and this makes me so happy. Oh wow, so cool.
My eyes, I'm tearing up right now. Wow.
I am too a little bit. It's so sweet.
Yeah, I have the ticket stub somewhere. I made a scrapbook for when our
Oh
year
my gosh.
I have it somewhere.
I never thought I would hear that ever. So I'm really honored and flattered and so happy for you both. That's amazing.
This film is really immerses you in Alex's headspace. I feel like I inherited all her anxiety and stresses for a great majority of it. So I gotta ask, are you both okay?
I feel perfectly great. Lauren, how about you?
I'm okay now. I gotta tell you that shooting the film, getting the film made was a thing. Shooting the film was a thing. In post-production in 2020, in the pandemic, doing it in my kitchen with my roommate cooking sausages behind me was definitely a thing. And not knowing if film festivals were going to exist, and being basically totally isolated and having no idea if anything was going to be existing, if we were all going to die. So I have to say this year I'm doing great. If you would have asked me this question last year, I would have been on the floor probably in fetal position, but right now we're good. We're good.
Well, I'm glad everything worked out and you're okay. Just because, I don't know, I think about like what you may have inherited from the character in between the takes. Like, is it easy to shake that? Does the writing take you to such a dark place, or can you keep a healthy distance when the pen is down and you're not in front of a camera?
You know, I think I do a pretty good job with having a really good time making the movie and then being able to really kind of step into the character when the cameras are rolling. And I think Lauren could probably talk to that more. I mean, I was like such a goofball on set, and I really wanted to have a positive attitude on a daily basis because I knew how difficult the shoot was. And I also was going through very similar kind of situations to Alex. I trained for 6 weeks to do this film. I didn't have a double. I rode the entire movie. I went through, you know, the rowing 6 hours a day starting at 4 a.m. I went through like having those blisters and being incredibly sore at the end of the day and not getting much sleep before starting the next day. And I really felt like I was like living in Alex's kind of world 100%, but my kind of, as Isabelle I was obsessed with telling this story. And with Alex, it's like this obsession with this sport and this goal. And so even though those are kind of similar and one and the same, I think I was able to kind of separate the two slightly. I mean, it felt like my reality was blurring constantly. I was like definitely feeling very real emotions because I was so physically exhausted and mentally exhausted that most of my performance, I think, just kind of came out of like the greater understanding of the sport and falling in love with it, and also really feeling my own personal need to prove myself on the set. And so that I think was kind of blurring, but I also wanted to have a positive attitude every single day because I knew how difficult of a film this would be to film. I mean, we only had, 24 days plus a splinter day. Mm-hmm. And for a film of this size, that's not enough time. And we really kind of pushed everything out. And I knew that if I was, sad and miserable, like, sometimes you look at Alex and think, is she okay? That everyone on set was going to have a horrible time. And I really wanted to make sure that everyone looked at me, and if I had a smile on my face, they knew like, oh, okay, even though it's freezing cold and we're on boats in the middle of the water and Isabelle's peeing off the side of her boat, like she's having a good time. So we're okay.
I mean, for me, shooting this was particularly raw because a lot of these scenes, I mean, I wrote the first draft of the script in July 2017, and I did the last pass of it literally days before we were shooting in the very end of 2019. So I was writing in new things that I had gone through. Sort of, it took my 4 years of collegiate rowing and 10 years of coming of age, but a lot of the emotional traumas and things were things that were happening to me in between the first draft of the script and kind of the what's on the screen. And so yeah, I mean, sharing this into the world and having the crew read the pages and having to shoot these scenes, like some of them really did a number on me. I mean, there's the scene at the end of the film where Isabelle and Delone and so Alex and Danny are having this fight in the bathroom, and that was really, 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 really brutal for me to watch. But then it was a closed set, and I was in the next room, and it was a pitch black room, and eventually called cut, and I was like in tears, I was crying, and the makeup chicks came over to me and were like, does she need to touch up? And I'm just like, why do you have to ask me this? Like, I'm like, it's fine. Like, I'm trying not to reveal that I'm in tears, and they could hear it in my voice. And then we were all kind of crying on the floor after that particular take that we used in the film. So that was brutal. And two, yeah, I mean, getting into the headspace at times, like when I was editing this thing too, I mean, I was going crazy with the pandemic, but having to get into this dark headspace. When I was cutting the assembly, I was like Howard Hughes. I was editing, I worked 28 days straight cutting, just getting the first assembly together of the film, working like 16-hour days, hunched over my laptop in a cafe, and then would go home and put the movie on and play it on loop, and like be sitting on my floor in the pitch black, drinking beer like a crazy person and just watching it over and over and over and over. So yeah, I mean, it was rough. It was a thing, but I think like part of the thing I love about writing and creating or directing or anything is the immersion. And it's kind of, I'll talk about this, is stepping into this role and getting to inhabit something. It's a dark pretend, but I liked that immersion, for better or worse. So.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about the the editing, which stood out to me as much as the sound did, with how the score and the music will adapt to different environments, such as the cancellation of noise or this kind of like warped effect that definitely reflects Alex's headspace. And then the editing too, which there's like quick cuts, the camera movement has this kind of fluid approach to it, just like the water that she's in. I would love to know more about exploring that psychological landscape with using all the different filming components.
Yeah, well, the challenge for this film became, for one, I wanted to do my version of the sort of obsessed artist trope. This idea of someone, usually when we see these types of films, there's some kind of external force happening, or they're working for some external goal, some winning a race, going through the Olympics, there's something, or there's the instructor, the coach, there's someone kind of there. And like for me, I've never related to that. It's always been this internal thing. And probably in rowing too, I mean, it's not like when you watch it from the sidelines, it's not inherently exciting. Like I recently went to a race and watched these people row by me, and they're in the middle of the race and it looks so peaceful and serene and quite frankly a little boring. But I know, having been in that boat, that you feel like you're about to die. And so the challenge for me is like, I want the audience to feel what it feels like to be driven by obsession, and also to be kind of in the middle of the sport feeling like you're about to die. So that really determined everything. That determined, in one of my early sound supervisors, sound mentors, the best directors, everything has intention, and everything you're putting on the screen or in the speakers needs to be going to tell the story. So there's nothing done just because it's cool. Everything that's done, with the camera movement to the editing to the sound to the look, everything is to try to evoke these internal states that are so hard to put external. Like film is an external medium. Like it's not a novel. You don't have this novelization of things. Like, so that's the challenge. And that sort of drove the sound design, with how to, to show that her world is very insular. With the sound design, everything else is stripping away, but her breathing is hyper realized. Voices are warbly, and even playing with the score, muting it at times and doing weird things with the score, which is supposed to exist outside of Alex, but I kind of like blurring those lines. And then visually with the camera and the lighting at time, like the action scenes in this, they're not your classic cool. I mean, we have different scenes or doing different things, but some of them are very kind of abstract, and a spotlight comes on and the rest of the world is in blackness and rowing in blackness, and showing the literal feeling of when you're in that moment, that headspace, how it is, and the editing as well. Like I wanted the film in every aspect to play with juxtaposition, going from quiets to loud to the blues to greens to slow cuts to quick cuts. Like everything is just, I want it to be jarring. I want it to feel like a punch in the face, and that influenced every single aspect that you see in here.
So how did you achieve, like there's a slow motion shot toward the middle, maybe a little earlier than the middle, where you're exploring some of that darkness, and then the way that the camera moves, where you can see like the sweat and the intensity of all the movement, it almost has like don't take this as an insult, but like a CGI kind of look to it, where I noticed this kind of filming effect, whether it's like the lenses that you use, Mark Zuckerberg, Jesse Eisenberg walking around Harvard and the Social Network, where like the camera that they use kind of makes it look like a model. And I don't know if that was something that you played with to kind of give it this reality bending kind of thing for her, but just would love to know about achieving some of those shots.
Yeah, I mean, we used that was a scene that I wrote into the script that way, super slow motion, and we shot on the Phantom, which I think what we ended up shooting for that is 500 frames a second. And 24 frames a second is your classic, so it is extremely slow. And then shooting it, yeah, I mean, the amount of light needed to do that, there was this huge thing that was I was over Isabel's like, please, dear God, that thing better be up there good, because it was this giant spotlight. The amount of light needed to even see anything at that rate. And then it was Todd, like he was manning the camera on that and working and getting the movement and the flow. And he has this amazing eye, and it felt like a dance. And I mean, it was, and Isabelle was having, I mean, she can talk about that, but it seemed like she was having a blast at that moment. But yeah, and I wanted to
glycerin and like just like literally erging as fast as I could, as hard as I could. And we didn't have, I don't know how long we had the camera for, but it was not for a long time. So we were like, we have to get this like really fast, really fast.
Yeah, and I wanted to feel almost like those really cheesy, corny early 90s kind of love scenes where you see the curves, you don't really see anything, but you see I wanted to feel like that almost, because, and Isabelle and I talked about this, and Todd, the DP, also, it's like this idea very roughly that this is the story of a romance between a girl and the sport. And so this is the first time making love, like that is how that scene is supposed to feel. And so it's the thing this film is objectified, but this is a scene I'm like, Isabelle, I'm going to objectify you. Like, this is what we're doing here. I want to evoke that experience. And she too is having this kind of visceral, emotional, physical, this orgasmic almost thing that's happening. I mean, if you've done a 2K, the line between pain and pleasure it becomes this blurry sort of thing. And so yeah, I mean, I wanted to feel a little bit like Scarlett Johansson in that movie. I think it's Under the Skin, where she's the creeper and she's walking through the blackness, and it's this bizarre thing. Like, that was kind of really what I was evoking there.
Did this film increase your intake of poetry just because of the symbolism or the metaphors of like the crows and the crabs, and even some of the beats of the story kind of have this poetic structure to it?
I was reading a little Bukowski before, very cliche, a little before we shot this film for other reasons, personal reasons. But yeah, I mean, the imagery of the raven and the crab for me both kind of represent things within Alex that she's dealing with, her sort of insecurity, as well as the other versus herself, and the lines between them as we start, it gets blurrier and blurrier and blurrier. Like, I think the beautiful thing about, and I love poetry too. I mean, poetry, I think, also evokes great things for screenwriting, because in both screenwriting and poetry, you're trying to put the most amount of emotion in sort of a little space, and the way you use words and what words you use evokes a lot to the reader. And yeah, like having, like, when it starts out, she's drawing a crab, and by the end she's in the tub with the crab, which Isabelle loves that scene, more than anything. But yeah, it is supposed to be a little bit, it's supposed to be abstract.
Yeah, I love this scene when Alex is talking to Coach Pete about weight distribution and the mathematics to better the boat, and he says, don't focus on the numbers, and it's enough to drive me crazy. How do you find that balance yourself in the areas of acting and directing, and knowing when it's important to allow the technicalities in, or just going with the flow and trying not to think about it too much?
Gosh, it's a good question, because I don't really have an answer to it. I mean, I'm in an artistic endeavor, so I think I'm never like going after that like number per se. I'm more going after like a feeling, which is not an attainable feeling. It's like you can prepare and get as ready as you want and have every single note and feel like you're 1,000,000% prepared. But, in order to kind of have those very rare special moments where you really feel like you're punched in the face by something naturally, that comes from being present with the actor opposite you, like when in the scene in the bathroom with Delone when Danny and Alex have that big fight. I mean, like at the end of that scene, us coming down to the ground and crying, that was something that didn't happen on on purpose. Like Delone just started grabbing at my shirt, and then I was fighting with her, and then we were on the ground, and then we were crying, and it kind of like turned the scene into something so special and unique that like we all ended up crying on the floor, like Lauren said. Like Lauren was crying, Todd, our DP, was crying, Delone was crying, I was crying, and we were just like lying on the floor for like 10 minutes in the middle of the workday because we just emotionally realized like what we had captured was like an actual breakup. Like we actually broke up. And I think with athletics, it's so different because you're going after that like specific time, that specific number. It really is whether you're good enough or you're not. So that kind of falls into this whole category of, you know, being an athlete and the mental health of an athlete and how different that is, especially if you are the one who's driving your own ambition, like Alex is. She's the villain. She's the hero of this story. I mean, you know, this last year with the Olympics and Simone Biles dropping out, I remember, you know, everyone kind of falling on one side or the other of that argument of like, oh my God, this is so incredible for her. Oh my gosh, this is so sad. And I was kind of like, I totally feel for her because the entire world around her, like there's no pressure coming from anyone else. Everyone else is saying she's incredible and everything she does is amazing. But imagine being her and being like a tiny bit off on the twist that you want to do, or doing tricks that nobody else could possibly even attempt to do. And you're not doing them to the best of your ability, the way that you believe that you should be doing. I mean, yeah, everyone's telling you you're doing a great job, and she's probably sitting there going, you're applauding my mediocrity when I'm not anywhere near as good as I know that I can be. So, you know, it really is a fascinating place to be. I don't know the answer to the question, honestly. As an actress, like I think it really, at some points you do just actually have to let go because there's no other option. There really isn't sometimes. And other times you can kind of try and micromanage something. It just doesn't necessarily work. But I think sports and art are very, very different in those regards. And maybe it is attaining that feeling of like feeling like you succeeded in that. I mean, I think in acting, I've kind of like gotten to a point where I realize so much of it is like who you're around, the character that you're playing opposite, the actor you're with, the director, how many ingredients are like in this incredible pot that you're like making. And if it actually turns into like a really good, tasty meal. Like I had an acting teacher a long time ago who said, you don't want to have a pre-cooked meal. You want to cook it in front of everybody else because it's way more impressive and it's actually tasty when you eat it fresh. And it's true. When you have something pre-cooked, it doesn't work. And I think this is, you know, with athletics, it's like, that's all it is. You're pre-cooking the meal so your muscles remember, so you can do it again and again and again.
That was really well put. For somebody who said that they didn't have an answer, it was really hell of an answer. Lauren, do you have
I just kind of rambled and I realized it was like, oh, maybe I do know what I'm talking about.
No, there's a lot in there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't know per se either. I mean, my thing is I am very clinical and analytical and balancing that with kind of emotion. I mean, when even making the film, editing the film, whatever, when I get stuck on things, the first thing when something's not right, it is obsessing over it. And I do clinically analyze things frame by frame. I'm literally putting my film up against other films and seeing where moments hit, where beats hit. I'm comparing the script. I'm looking at where things hit and that, and like the emotional arcs. And I'm literally making graphs and I'm doing things very clinically for something that is emotional. But ultimately, the thing that I've also learned to listen to is using that to kind of try and work through things when everything's swirling and there's chaos. But then ultimately with this, it's like there's always this gut feeling. For me, I knew when things were working, like I could have this gut click, like from the 11th hour, everything came together with the score and the final huge pass with the edit. And that was the first moment. It was right, like literally days before we had to submit it to film festivals, that I finally felt good with the film. And that was an emotional kind of gut feeling. And whether you want to call it gut instinct or your third eye or God or the muse or whatever the 5,000 words exist, like that's just a collection of sort of life experience of you just know when something is working. So I don't know, it's a balance. Like my MO about everything is nuance. I want to get it tattooed on my arm, actually. Nuance. So I think that answered your question. Maybe not, but that's my feeling. So
well, I thought that 20 minutes would be enough, but I still have so much more that I would love to ask you both. But that's how you know that you made a really rich film that's really worthwhile. So I'm so appreciative of your time, and this was really special for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Preston. And please tell your wife I say hi. I wish I could hug you both.
I'll definitely.
Yeah. I'm not kidding. I will ask and see if I can. I don't know when when we release Orphan 2, but I will try and get you and your wife tickets, because I would want nothing more than to have you guys come to see the movie and be able to meet you both in person.
Oh, that would be so great. Well, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much, and maybe we'll talk soon.
Thank you too. Bye.